Okay, so now we have our pieces cut and embossed with our texture plates from Spellbinders. It has a very deep texture on both sides of your metal. And now it's very thin and can be bent easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to solder around the edges of these metals to build them up thick enough so that they won't bend. So what we're going to do is we're going to get flux. And we're going to brush the edges. On both sides. And get a little bit of solder. We're going to hold this piece at an angle while we're soldering. That way it doesn't run all into all those pretty little textured crevices. So we're going to put some solder on the edge here, and we're just going to start building it up. Get a little solder on your tip. Just gently touch it to the edge. Just working a little bit at a time, making sure you rotate your piece as you go so that the solder stays along the bottom edge and it's not running all into all those pretty textured areas that you've already made. Use gravity to make your piece come out great. As you can see, it's really starting to build up nicely on that edge. And when we're done with this side, we'll go to the other side and do the same thing. Just keep picking up a small drop of solder and laying it on the edge. If you get to a point where you're trying to put solder down and you're taking your soldering iron off of the solder and you're getting sharp points, that is a sign that you don't have enough flux on your piece to make all that wonderful solder flow smoothly. So just brush on a tiny little bit more flux, wipe your tip off, make it nice and clean, pick up a small drop of solder and just hit that edge. Just gently touch it, just enough to transfer that solder to the edge. And if you don't like it, you can always go back and add a little bit more solder or take some away. These look really nice with a kind of a bumpy edge. It works well with the texture that you put on. Go through, and I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. Just adding, making sure that you rotate. Again, if it's not flowing smoothly and it's not going on well, just add some more flux. I like to use the gel flux because it goes where I want it to and it stays there. But you can use any flux that you're comfortable with. Make sure you keep your tip clean. It will make for a very nice soldered line. You can see we're really building up that edge. And we'll just continue to build up until you're happy with it. It doesn't have to be super thick, but just thick enough so that it doesn't bend easily. I like that kind of chunky, almost makes it look like it's been cut out with a welding rod almost. Kind of looks pretty neat. Very industrial. And you can leave it chunky, you can add drops however you want. Add a little bit more. If you come back and you don't like a space, you can always heat it up and remove the solder or add more. It's a fun thing about solder, you can keep playing with it. When you're just working on metal, sometimes when you're working with glass you can't, because you can run the risk of breaking your glass with too much heat. But when you're just working with copper sheet, and you really have a good leeway there to play with it. And I think that's all I'm going to do on that one. Actually, I think I'm going to put a little bit more on this one little spot. It's a little thin. Another thing you're doing when doing this is you're making the edges, you're basically sealing the edges so that they're not sharp. So, when you cut that metal, you have kind of a sharp edge, and when you go and solder the edges like this, it makes that edge not sharp anymore. So there we have a heart with a built-up edge. Okay, I think I'm going to do the little key house next. Make sure you brush your solder. Brush your flux on, excuse me. Plenty of flux. Not going to hurt anything. We're going to go with the flow here. With the flow of gravity here. Always tilt your piece so that gravity can keep that solder on the edge and it doesn't run down into all your fun texture you created with your embossing plates or your texture plates. And always make sure that you're holding these pieces over a protected surface like a tin plate or a heat-proof mat, something like that. Because you don't want these, when you're doing this technique, it will drip, and anything under it that's flammable may burn, including yourself. Okay. To clean my tip off a little bit. Solder was trying not to stick for me. Now, and just lay that on the edge to build up that edge. I love making these because they're so easy, using Spellbinders dies and die cut machines to get lots of different shapes and different textures, and you make all kinds of parts and pieces to make jewelry out of, for necklaces and bracelets and earrings and charms. You can do so many things with this technique and all the different shaped dies there are out there. And you can get all kinds of texture with a hammer and things like that, but getting a key texture on a piece of metal, for instance, that's a little bit more tricky if you're not molding the metal somehow. So, I think I like that one. Build up that corner a little bit. It looks a little sharp. So I think, yeah, I like this piece here. It's pretty built up. It's got my key texture in it, and the edges are built up nicely on both sides. Now with these house templates, if you're worried about it being a little too sharp there at the tip, you can always just take a pair of wire cutters and just cut that off because it's so thin, and then we can, go from there. So there's that one. I've got the heart and the house done. I'm going to move on to the pieces for our bracelet, our 3-piece bracelet. I'm going to do the same thing with them, just building up the edges until they're thick enough to give it a little stability. What I like to do with these before I start is I like to get them rounded just a little bit, and you can kind of look at your wrist and they're so thin they bend really easy, and you can just go in and bend them a little bit, with your fingers or around a bottle. You can lay them around a bottle and bend them like that if you prefer it to be more even, so that when you're ready, it is the shape that you want it. And so when you build up these edges, it will help keep that curved shape. Now this one is going to go like this instead of this, so that you would bend this one just a little bit, not a lot, a little less than a normal cuff bend, so you can see how that one is bent just a little bit up. And I'm going to bend the other side as well. Now this would be a side piece to the cuff here, as you can see. So I'm going to solder those and the rest of my pieces, and then I will show you how to get that nice aged design. You see the difference between the shiny and the aged piece. And then beyond that, we'll work on attaching our pieces, go over wire wrapping a little bit, and give you some different ideas on how to use these pieces that you've made to make your own jewelry.